Okay. This whole entire chapter is about stem changing verbs. It also comes back and reviews some of the stuff that we've already gone over from Spanish 1, like the tener and querer and jugar. We had done boot and shoe verbs in Spanish 1. We also did at the beginning of Spanish 2 reflexive verbs. So if a verb happens to be reflexive and it has the se at the end of the verb, you're going to put your me, te, se, nos, and se in the beginning of the verb, before the verb. Once you're left over, you're going to have an AR, ER, IR verb, then you're going to use your endings to conjugate it in either present, preterite, or any of the other imperfect, future, different tenses we're going to learn. Reflexives stay the same. What changes are your conjugations and your endings. This chapter specifically focused on stem-changing verbs, and we have stem-changing verbs in present and preterite. They're just different kinds of stem changes. So, just to be clear, what's the stem part of the verb? What's left over once you drop your AR, ER, IR? You're going to take away your AR, ER, IR to put your right endings to add conjugations. But the stem, think of it as a flower. What holds up the flower? The stem part, and then your ending is the flower part that you attach to the end of it. Okay. So in the present tense, we have boot and shoe verbs. Why do we call them boot or shoe verbs?
Because they change in the boot or in the shoe.
Right, so the stem changes in either the boot shape or the shoe shape. We call it that to remind you that if it happens to be out of the boot, you don't make a stem change in either the boot or the shoe. Now the difference between boot and shoe is what? The yo form. So boot verbs will change all the way up to the yo form. Shoe verbs, there's something irregular about the yo form. You only have 4 of them on your chart. 2 on the bottom of the E to IE side, 2 on the bottom of the E to I side. Then we also have 3 types of boot or shoe changes in the present tense. O to UE, E to IE, and E to I. How do we know what to change?
If it's inside.
True. If a verb has an O, what's the only change it can make? UE. What if it has an E? You've got IE changes and I changes.
It's an IR, so the
So looking at your specific chart that you've been given, you have all your E to I verbs end in IR. And you only have 5 that I've given you on your chart that are E to IE. And remember, I made up that little saying with the first letters of each of the verbs. Divertirse, preferir, referir, servir, and venir. Anybody remember the saying? Did it help anybody? Do, practice, and reference your stem changing verbs. Okay, so it helps you narrow down that your 5 IR verbs in the middle will be E to IE changes. Any other IR verb will be an E to I change. And any other verb that happens to have an E on the stem, and it's an AR verb or ER verb, the only change that it can make is E to IE. Ready to follow me? Okay. Shoe ones, you just got to worry about the yo form being irregular. Sorry, I didn't complete that thought there. Tener and venir. You got to remember, tengo and vengo. And then the rest of the shoe shape changes the stem from E to IE. Decir and seguir. You got to remember, digo, sigo. Then the rest of the shoe shape changes from E to I. Okay. So that's present tense, and that it's implied. We should know right now that present tense, ignoring the preterite stuff for now, we're doing our present tense endings, o asa, amos an, o ese, imos en. Okay. So obviously, that's what you attach to conjugate it, but you have to make some sort of stem change to these verbs also. Any verb that has an accent on the original verb, like freír and sonreír, get accents on all the I's. we happen to have these verbs in the preterite tense, the extra accents are going to be on the to form and nosotros form. So if the original verb has an accent, all the I's, an accent party. That's in the present tense. If we're doing this, so present tense, every single I. If we're doing it in the preterite, and the original verb has an accent, these two are extra. But these two should normally be there because those are your endings for preterite verbs. They already have accents. So far, so good? Okay. So looking at stem changing verbs, in the preterite tense, you're now looking at it, you're looking at your chart with different I's. You're only paying attention to verbs that end in IR. You could care less about AR and ER verbs because they're just regular conjugations. So there's no AR verbs, there's no ER verbs, there's no E to IE change, there's no O to UE change. Preterite's more simple. You use your preterite endings. We're only going to worry about ER IR verbs because there are no AR verbs. So you don't need to know your he, haste, o, amos, aron, AR endings. You just need to know your I, iste, yo, imos, and dieron. And it's only going to be if a verb has an O, it's going to make a U change. If a verb has an E, it's going to make an I change. You don't have to do process of elimination and narrow it down. Now, if the verb happens to have an additional accent, put your two extra accents there. Those two should be there. And why do I call it a basement?
These are only changes in the basement.
Only changes in the bottom two. If you want to stay with the shoe theme, then it's a flip-flop verb. Whatever you want to call it. As long as you know that in the preterite, you're only going to change IR verbs, and you're only going to change them in the basement from O to U or E to I. So you change that in the stem, then you attach your endings to it, and your conjugation is ready to go. Does that help? So we're okay with doing the same set of verbs from your chart in the present tense. Boot or shoe changes. O to U, E to I. Then switch it up. If we want to do the same set of verbs, and you guys tell me if we need this extra practice. I'm just going to tell you what the difference is here. If I tell you, do these in the present tense. Get the meaning, figure out the verb. I'm going to give you a verb bank. We do them in the present tense, we do our stem changes and boot or shoot. But if we were to do the same set of verbs and I were to change your directions and I would say, forget present tense, we're doing these in the preterite now, same exact sentences. What would we automatically rule out?
AR and ER verbs.
Right. You don't have to worry about those. Do you have to worry about IR verbs that are in the yo form, to form, or nosotros form? Nope. Regular conjugations with those. So out of this, if we were doing this in the preterite, there's not that much to worry about. Because you're only going to worry about IR verbs in the preterite. That's an IR verb, but it's not in the basement. That's an IR verb, and it is in the basement, so you change the stem. Anything else, you don't change anything in the stem, it's just a regular conjugation. And there's a couple of ones in there that in the present tense, we're going to learn later in the semester that there's a different kind of change to them. That's a whole other chapter. Are we okay with switching between present, preterite? We're just kind of putting everything together. Stem changers that we did, reflexives every now and then, present that we learned, and preterite that we learned. All in one big lump.